All right, let's get into the realms of high strangeness and talk about time and time travel and the mandala effect and all that good stuff. And this is kind of building on the last video that I put up regarding the white sun. Um, if we go with the assumption that it is a natural phenomena taking place, which again, examining all of the evidence, I think that that is the most likely scenario, especially when you go around YouTube or wherever else, and um, you can find people who are using the cloud busters to dissipate the trails in certain areas. And when that is done, the clear blue sky returns for brief periods of time. And when you look at the sun in that environment, you get a whole different idea of what's taking place. And you can actually, in that scenario, um, feel it on your skin, and you can really get an idea that this is not something artificial taking place here. This is you can just feel in your instinctively that this is something beneficial. So, uh, uh, similarly, with the metaphor then of the Blu-ray disc, right? The whole point there was, well, with the old yellow sun, it was more towards the infrared spectrum of the visible light spectrum, and those wavelengths are longer, which found its corollary in the DVD, which was using those longer red wavelengths to send information to be decoded by the system that would eventually produce the picture. So when they upgraded to the Blu-ray disc, they shortened the wavelengths. They were able to do this by using a different um, construction of the way that the information was transmitted to the decoder that was producing the image. So by using those shorter blue wavelengths, they were essentially able to double, or I mean that might not be technically the exact measurements, but loosely speaking, they were able to double the amount of wavelengths that could be sent into the decoder um, at any given time. And in that way, you double the amount of information that can be decoded. And accordingly, you are able to increase the definition of the picture from the DVD to the Blu-ray. And the end result is you get this high definition picture that is much clearer and more realistic than the old DVD. And so you can see the analogy there to the white sun, which if we used to perceive it as yellow, and now we're perceiving it as this white sun, and the UV radiation in the Earth that is being measured has jumped dramatically in the past 20, 30 years, kind of correlating with that idea that these shorter UV wavelengths are coming through, and we are perceiving it then as this white, um, jagged sort of sun that has this different refraction through the atmosphere. And if you're not lucky enough to see it on a day where there's no second atmosphere of the artificial uh, cloud trailing going on, if you see it through then it gets even more. It has even more of those diffraction tails that really make it hard to see the actual round sun behind that. So going with that idea, I know I'm not alone. Just looking at this post that I found on Godlike Productions, um, there are many people who just have this intuitive sense that time has sped up, and I'm definitely one of them. I mean, um, time is not what it used to be, and uh, you can see that in this poll here. Now, of course, many skeptics would look at this and say, well, this isn't exactly a scientific sample size. And on top of that, it's fucking Godlike Productions, right? So, um, not necessarily the most peer-reviewed group of people out there, right? But I think it kind of it speaks volumes a little bit, because this is the group of people that would, necessarily probably have a little higher awareness of what's going on, and they might be a little more in tune with their surrounding environment, unlike people who would, just scoff at anything that is labeled a conspiracy theory. But yeah, so I mean, I've noticed this. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but it feels like it was just January to me, like 3 weeks ago. Like the equivalent of 3 weeks ago was January, and it's already almost the middle of April. So, and just on a daily basis, like the amount of things that you used to be able to consider a day, it's just there's a totally different perception of it going on. Now, the first, well, for I like how I do that sometimes. I'm like, well, first, and then immediately I think of something else, and then I say, oh no, this first. So sorry for that bad habit. But so just like the Gods of Egypt post, I have some random notes, and this is actually how any blog post that I write starts out. I just write down some notes. Um, so I guess this is just kind of like demystifying that process, because when you listen to me, it's obvious that I'm not any sort of, I'm not as intelligent as I can trick you into believing with these blog posts that I spend so much time writing, right? Where there's no mistakes or anything like that. But so just the idea to start out, like the reason that the river of time, right? Or the stream of consciousness. That's why it's called a stream of consciousness, because it's building on that metaphor. So when you incarnate into this reality, your awareness metaphorically jumps into the stream of time. So going back to what I was talking about with the white sun, if the flow of the quote unquote river of time were to change as a consequence of a change in the structure of the reality itself, there would be a consequent change in your perception of the flow of that river, i.e., you might perceive the current to flow faster against your body, or in this case, your mind's perception of the passage of time. So the first counter argument that comes up to this idea is age. And like, for example, there was this article linked in that post right there, why half of the life you experience is over by age 7. And I'll just read a little bit of this. Have you ever observed that time seems to be going by faster as you get older? There's a reason that one summer seems to stretch out forever when you're a kid, but zips by before you know it when you're 30. That reason is perspective. When you're 1 year old, a year is literally forever to you. It's all the time that you've ever known. But as you grow older, 1 year is a smaller and smaller fraction of your total life. It's like watching something shrink in your rearview mirror. This idea has stunning implications. It means that parents actually see their children grow up much faster than children perceive themselves to be. For example, when you are 1 year old, a year is 100% of your life. And by the time you're 8, a year is only 12.5% of your life. So the general idea here is obviously correct because time is relative in that way. However, what I was saying here is that if we go with the idea that the actual structure of reality and thus our perception of it is changing, the flow of time or the river of time or the stream of consciousness interacting with physical reality, that flow has increased for all perceivers. So just like in the prior speed, what I just read will hold true. The old, quote unquote, will still be able to perceive time in a faster way than the young, because of the example that article was giving about how, well, when you're 1, that's 100% of your lifetime. So that year seems so much longer to that infant than it would to, somebody who's 55, right? But this does not explain away the fact that the stream itself has changed for everyone inside of it, meaning every sentient, aware being that is in this reality right now. And just to get an idea of that, the best description of time that I've heard, and it's just one of those things that when you hear it just like clicks within you as, oh, that is true. And it's that feeling you get when you hear something and you just say to yourself, "Oh, I don't know how this is possible, but I feel like I knew that already." Um, but it was Jonathan who described time as an element, as in an element on the periodic table of elements, and then you, of course, you have the in the name itself, period, right? Um, and the way I envision this is like if you look at the periodic table of elements, and there are all of those elements listed, and they're separated by their various classifications that you know chemists and scientists have given to these things, like noble gases or um, well, I shouldn't have even mentioned one because that just shows that I don't know the names of the rest of them. But anyway, so the idea, I envision that like there's just a huge rectangle um, surrounding all of those elements, and you can put a big T on it, right? And it's how time is interacting with each and every one of those elements. It's like the missing piece of the periodic table. Um, so the and then he went on to describe how the scale of perception determines the relativity of time. So a being with a relatively short lifespan to us, like say a hummingbird's days, that seems very short. However, to the hummingbird, those few days will be perceived as a lifetime would be to us. And you can see that metaphor there um, in that article that I was just going over about how the year to the 1 year old is so much longer than the year to the person that's lived 55 of them already. And then there's that relativity in time um, as a function of perception. And then this is why Jonathan gave that cancer metaphor. Like sort of in response to someone who would say, well, look at the world around us, and you can certainly look at the world around us and see just so much fucked up shit going on. And you say, well, why would God, if God exists, why would God let something like this happen? And, as the metaphor went, well, on the scale of the intelligence that would be referred to as God, to it, our lifespans and even the entire history of human civilization itself is a very short period of time. So to us, quote unquote, healing or returning to homeostasis as a race of beings would seem like a long, drawn out process. I mean, look at the past, whatever, 2,000 years, of just incredible mayhem and well, we'll get to history, but so just as the same process would seem to the awareness of the cells in your body dealing with cancer over a period of time that seems very short to your own awareness, right? Somebody can be diagnosed with cancer out of nowhere, and they're dead within 2 years. But to the awareness of your cells, that process could have seemed like a lifetime. Um, so I think it's funny how somebody like the front man that they put out there in the form of Albert Einstein, he discusses time as his theory is even called the theory of relativity, but it's kind of like a replacement for this true interpretation of time. If you see what I think you can see that, right? Um, the relativity of time is more in this perceptual scale context than it is in like the speed of light. You know what I mean? Come on. And so going further, you can even see this in the name itself, right? Time backwards is emit, and emit. So you discharge or release something. You emit currency into circulation, right? So time is emitted in both directions from your stream of consciousness interacting with physical reality. And the way I imagine this is those streams contain images backwards and forwards. Um, and I did a crude little drawing of this in paint just to kind of like help, excuse me, kind of help visualize this. So this is you, the person, and well, actually, before I get into, well, I'll get into it a little bit, but then there's another article I want to read. Um, So you can imagine this is like the stream of time that we were talking about. Your awareness incarnates into this reality, and you necessarily, through the interaction of your thought form magnetic field, or of the psyche, you are creating this time stream. And as you go forward, you have your memories and you have your projections of the future. And these are both feedback loops that are simultaneously um, cycling in your stream of consciousness. Um, and well, I'll read this article first just to get a better handle on this. Let's see. Let me put this down real quick. Okay, so let's see. This is an article on a site I had never really seen before called Brain Pickings. And okay, where's the start of it? Here we go. To be human, writes Dan Falk in Search of Time, The History, Physics, and Philosophy of Time, is to be aware of the passage of time. Excuse me. No concept lies closer to the core of our consciousness, something evidenced by our millennia-old quest to map the invisible dimension. One of the most remarkable and evolutionarily essential elements, geez, 3 E words in a row, really, of experience. 4. Now, see, this as a writer, this just really bothers me. Sorry, I got to throw that in there. Why would you write that sentence? One of the most remarkable and evolutionarily essential elements of experiencing time through human consciousness is something psychologists and cognitive scientists call mental time travel, a potent bidirectional projection that combines episodic memory, which allows us to draw on our autobiographical experience and call up events, experiences, and emotions that occurred in the past, with the ability to imagine and anticipate future events. Falk puts it unambiguously. Without it, there would be no planning, no building, no culture. Without an imagined picture of the future, our civilization would not exist. Now, again, before we go on, we got to put this in the context of what I was talking about in homeostatic equilibrium, which is this tendency of people to refer to this as our civilization, including you by assumption in this process, as if you were a part of it, right? Now, of course, tangentially, you were a part of it in that you enter the stream of artificial culture, and then your actions are influenced by it, but you did not create it. It's not some natural evolutionary outgrowth of what you would do without this artificial alien influence. And I don't mean that in the sense of beings. I'm just saying like that alien influence on your stream of consciousness, which, as we'll see in this article, is determining your future movements in the stream of time. So going on, as it turns out, episodic memory, a term coined in the early 1970s by Canadian neuroscientist Endel Tolving, author of the seminal book Elements of Episodic Memory, is central to our capacity for mental time travel, and according to many this guy is not a good writer, is central to our capacity for mental time travel and, according to many scientists, fairly unique to humans. Unlike other facets of memory, such as the acquisition of new skills, which are rooted in the here and now, Falk points out that episodic memory allows us to, quote, peer back across time using our imagination to revisit just about any event that we choose. This mental reliving of the past may be the root of some distinct human maladies. Take the wistful reminiscence over a lost love, for instance, but it is also central to our evolutionary survival, allowing us to anticipate future outcomes based on past ones, and thus to plan better and be more prepared for what tomorrow may bring. The dark side of this evolutionary beneficial faculty is that our over-planning often ends up shortchanging our happiness. Oh yeah, go figure. Like people who are just, that's just the way the system of civilization gets you to operate when you're inside of it. You're constantly planning for the future, right? The next thing. Totally just ignoring the moment that you're in. And yet the benefits outweigh the costs. In evolutionary terms, Falk explains, the capacity for mental time travel gave our ancestors an invaluable edge in the struggle for survival. They believe there is a profound link between remembering the past and imagining the future. The very act of remembering, they argue, gives one the raw material needed to construct plausible scenarios of future events and act accordingly. Mental time travel provides increased behavioral flexibility to act in the present to increase future survival chances. If this argument is correct, then mental time travel into the past, remembering, is subsidiary to our ability to imagine future scenarios. Tulving agrees. What is the benefit of knowing what has happened in the past? Why do you care? The importance is that you've learned a lesson, he says. Perhaps the evolutionary advantage has to do with the future, excuse me, rather than the past. Modern neuroscience appears to confirm that line of reasoning. As far as your brain is concerned, the act of remembering is indeed very similar to the act of imagining the future. Though we might not be able to remember the future as the Red Queen does. Oh, and there was a paragraph above talking about the Red Queen from Alice in Wonderland in Lewis Carroll's novel, where the Red Queen remembers the future instead of the past. So, though we might not be able to remember the future as the Red Queen does, we do envision it in ways strikingly similar to how we picture events from the past. Falk notes that fMRI studies indicate we use similar regions in the brain's frontal and temporal lobes when thinking about events in either direction of time. What's more, psychologists have found that much like it's harder for us to remember an event in the distant past than a recent one, it's harder for us to imagine an event in the distant future than one expected to take place soon. This hints at the massively misguided way in which we think of and evaluate memory, which we falsely depict as a recording device versus foresight. Falk writes, when we imagine the future, we know what we picture is really just an educated guess. We may be right in the broad brushstrokes, but we are also, but we are almost certainly wrong in the details. We hold memory to a higher standard. We feel most of the time that our memories are more than guesses, that they reflect what really happened. When confronted with a conflicting account of how last week's party unfolded, we cling to our beliefs. He must be mistaken. I know what I saw. That's interesting, too, how eyewitness testimony is inherently unreliable. Any attorney will tell you that. That's involved in the trial process, which we'll get into when we start talking about the Mandela effect. But Falk cites the Harvard psychologist Daniel Schachter. The brain is a fundamentally Oh, so we know this guy's about to tell us some truth, right? I couldn't help myself there. The brain is a fundamentally prospective organ that is designed to use information from the past and the present to generate predictions about the future. Memory can be thought of as a tool used by the prospective brain to generate simulations of possible future events. We tend to think of memory as having primarily to do with the past, and maybe one reason we have it is so that we can have a warm feeling when we reminisce and so on. But I think the thing that has been neglected is its role in allowing us to predict and simulate the future. In order to mentally time travel into the future, the brain has to accomplish a couple of things at once. We activate our semantic memory, which encompasses our basic knowledge of facts about the world and thus helps paint a backdrop for the imagined scene. And we call on our episodic memory, which pulls on our autobiographical library of remembered experiences to fill in specific details for this general scene. Curiously, episodic memory tends to be rather flawed, but according to two scientists Falk quotes, that's okay since its core purpose is to provide a more general toolbox that allowed us to escape from the present and develop foresight and perhaps create a sense of personal identity. To be sure, just like elsewhere in cognitive science, human exceptionalism may be misplaced here. Scientists have found that other species are also capable of varying degrees of mental time travel. Blah, 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 blah. I'll link this. Well, I already read this much. I'll just finish it. Falk cites one of the most intriguing experiments involving scrub jays. He writes, psychologist Nicola Clayton and her colleagues housed the birds on alternate days in two different compartments, one in which the jays always received breakfast and one in which they did not. Then the birds were unexpectedly given extra food in the evening at a location where they could access either compartment. The jays promptly cached their surplus, and they preferentially cached it in the no breakfast compartment. Because the birds were not hungry at the time of the I don't know how to pronounce that word, caching, the researchers claim that the birds truly anticipated the hunger they would experience the next morning. Still, the fact that humans are capable of remarkably elaborate and detailed mental time travel reveals something unique about our evolution and the development of such hallmarks of humanity as language and theory of mind. And again, um, there are no genes for language of the written variety, and speaking that written language by extension, this is something that we adapted to and learned, and it is therefore it is not a hallmark of humanity, right? So you can see you always have to keep that in your mind because that's how they try to trick you into this idea that, oh yes, this was just some natural evolution. We developed this written language to communicate better. And that goes back to that Terence McKenna talk, that little short video that I uploaded about how, um, language in the written form is not, through his experience in psychedelics, he came to that conclusion that, this artificial culture was not how we were designed to communicate from the start, right? And that psychedelic experience kind of took him back to that idea. Um, but how much longer is this? Let's see. But okay, so mental time travel may indeed be the cognitive rudder that allows our brains to navigate the river of time. So the reason that I brought this article up, I feel bad that I read the whole thing now. I should have just linked it. But anyway, is going back to that analogy that Jonathan Adam Pants was talking about. Later in his recording on The Healing Begins Now, um, he talks about the keys to God and how, um, where is that? And how you can heal yourself by going back in your memories of events that you feel shameful or guilty about, very really traumatic events that stick in your psyche and are constantly informing through the feedback loop as you move through the stream of time, that they're constantly informing your decision making in the present and your general disposition and thoughts on your relation to existence, and the idea was that by healing those, by taking yourself back and immersing yourself in that memory and forgiving yourself by understanding why it happened, and not sort of holding that grudge against yourself or the insane consciousness that that precipitated the event that happened to you, you can begin to heal yourself. And then by combining that with your imagination and your projections of the future, where you can imagine yourself in your fully healed state, the combination of those two feedback loops, when you're actually doing it in that way, will eventually allow you to achieve that state of healing, which I would call homeostasis, or you could call perfect health, or you could call connection to God. Right? You could describe it however you want to describe it, but or connection to a scale of intelligence that is far beyond the scale that we are currently aware of. So that's just kind of why I brought that article up, because that was a mainstream scientific people talking about this very process of mental time travel, right? And the crazy thing about it is, right, we have this I kind of describe it as like a thought form magnetic field, because it even kind of look, when you put it this way, it doesn't even kind of look like a magnet. And moreover, it is, I mean, you have to, this is a very simplified version, but it's also the infinity sign, right? um, but you have to imagine that there's only two loops here. Like if you imagine that each, there's like a screenshot of an image on this loop, screenshot of an image on this loop relating to a memory, right? That image you have in your mind of those memories. But you got to imagine there are, depending on how old you are, right? Relatively speaking, there's thousands maybe of memories that you have all going back and forth over and over and over again, right? So thousands of images in your mind. Even as I'm speaking right now, I have all of these images in my head of the past, right? Of memories. and they're flowing through that stream of consciousness in real time, constantly informing my psyche as I move forward in the actual time stream itself. And then all of those things are influencing my imaginative projections of the future, which are likewise, I mean, especially when you start doing the research on conspiracy theories and getting into this information, there's thousands of permutations, right? And I guess what I was going to say is the crazy thing is that not only is there this personal feedback loop system taking place, but then there is the artificial cultural feedback loop system that I was discussing in homeostatic equilibrium, where there is the stream of artificial culture likewise taking place above, well, maybe above is the wrong word, but it's taking place simultaneously with this personal stream of consciousness. So, and they're one and the same. If you are a member of this civilization and society, they're one and the same, right? Like if you're watching a television show, or you're watching this movie, or playing this video game, or watching this sports event, or whatever, watching the news, reading the newspaper, on and on and on, right? If you are essentially tapped into that stream of artificial consciousness, and the feedback loop in both in the past and in the future, which the past of the artificial cultural stream of consciousness would be the history as it is told to us, and then the future is the imaginative extrapolations of the Luciferian thought form, which is hijacking your own ability to do this and our ability to all do it individually and thus do it collectively to supersede that Luciferian thought form. I hope this is making sense. It makes sense in my head. I'm trying to explain it visually. And so you can see in many ways how this process right here in many people around the planet is simply the artificial cultural stream of consciousness that is interacting and superseding the personal awareness stream of consciousness that has the potential to be totally separate and unique from that larger stream of consciousness or thought form, however you want to perceive it. If it were to disconnect from that insanity, right? Because, well, just imagine somebody that's been like myself. Someone who's been to public school at every level. I was at public school, high school, college, graduate school. I went to public school the whole way through, and therefore, many of my memories regarding like what has transpired in the past as far as history goes was co-opted by what I was taught in school, which is beneficial to the official narratives. And my projections based on what I should be doing in the future, right? Be an upstanding member of civilization and society. That was what my projections were based on, because my the past feedback loops were based on that artificial culture. So that was just kind of, I hope this helped explaining what I was thinking. I don't know if it did, but that's kind of where I was coming at that from. And let's see. So going back here, I'm not sure, I don't remember where I left off. I think I left off at the emit part. So time backwards is emit. You have, you emit currency into circulation, a discharge or release. Time is emitted in both. This is where I left off. So time, when you incarnate into this physical reality, time is emitted as a function of that in both directions from your stream of consciousness, right? Time becomes this physical, well, quasi-physical aspect of the psyche, of consciousness, of your awareness. And it is a stream of consciousness, right? Because you're flowing in that river. You're constantly moving forward, but you have those two feedback loops happening simultaneously, right? And so the past and the future are both being emitted in like a, oh, imagine like a sparkler or something, right? Where the sparks are coming off of it, and it's like you're holding one in your left hand pointed to the left and one in your right hand pointed to the right, and those sparks are going off in two directions, but you're walking forward. Um, well, I guess you would have to be walking side to side for that to make sense. Okay, so imagine you're holding one behind your back and holding one in front of you, and the sparks are going in opposite directions. And that's like the sparks of the memories and imagination projections of the future that are feeding back on each other and creating this in the moment um, idea of of what you're doing in reality, what it is, what you should be doing, etc. Um, So imagine those streams contain images backwards and forwards. Oh, and yeah, so and those sparks are actual images, right? And that's what I meant to say about that Terence McKenna talk, where he's discussing how we think in pictures as a different sort of acoustical hologram. You know, that is, if you can visualize it in your mind's eye, but you can't really visualize it in physical reality. Um, so time travel would necessarily be the ability to unstick consciousness from the present moment and go back and really immerse yourself in one of those memories or in a future, an imaginative future. And you know that a lot of people would describe that the future technique as like visualization, and there's all sorts of new age garbage surrounding that technique. But there's, as usual, there's like an elementary truth to it, right? Where if we, because that's all, dude, these black magicians, that's all they're doing. That the subliminal and subconscious manipulation of the stream of artificial culture that comes through these medium is the message devices, they that informs our collective visualization. That's what the movies do. I mean, how many people associated disaster with 2012 because of the interplay of all this Mayan propaganda that was put out by disinformation agents, and the movie 2012, right, where it's a huge cataclysm. And then 7 days before 2012, December 21st, we have Sandy Hook, where supposedly the worst thing you could possibly imagine happened, where somebody went in and killed a bunch of kids. You know, like they totally saturated the collective mind with this negativity about 2012, and they did the same thing with 9/11. If you imagine it going back to the idea of the white sun and this changing structure of reality, well, now they got us all scared to death and angry and mad, and then they pass the Patriot Act, and then they create the TSA, and then they send us into Iraq and Afghanistan. They create this war on terror, which has just extended through, you know, extended through everything that we're seeing now with ISIS, and ISIS, going back to the Gods of Egypt post, ISIS is your eyes. So what is the war on ISIS? Hello, you know, the war on ISIS is the war on your eyes, man. That's what this media system is. So that's what these black magicians are using. They're just simply hijacking the process of visualization. And they do the same thing in the new age circles, where they get you to visualize this future that is totally disconnected from reality. Like, there is no reason that we could not collectively have this, you know, what many would perceive to be this enlightened future. But it's like they take you from this horrible situation supposedly that we're in, and then they put you in this utopian idea, and there's nothing in the middle to get you there. There's no actual practical ways to actually allow you to do that. And so that functions as a possible solution that a lot of people are visualizing, but it's not a visualization that will be likely achieved because it's not based in reality by design. And that's just the nature of controlled opposition in a conceptual form as ideas go. That's why this whole thing has come out. I mean, that's right. We'll get to that. So time travel would necessarily be the ability to unstick consciousness from the present moment. we have the ability to do this at any time into the past or future through memory and imagination. That's what I was just describing. However, it could be possible to achieve this literally, i.e., sending an individual's conscious awareness into the past or future of its linear timeline existence. And I have lost here because this is what they did in. They had the character Daniel Faraday was doing an experiment on a mouse, and it through manipulating electromagnetic energy, it transferred the consciousness of the mouse um, into the future for a minute, and then it brought it back, right? Or it waited for it to catch up. And the whole gist of the thing is the mouse ran the maze, but he had not taught the mouse to how to run it yet, right? He sent the mouse into the future, and in that future of the mouse's linear timeline, it had then been taught how to run the maze by the character Daniel Faraday. So it was able to complete it, quote unquote, before it had been taught. So, this gets into things like, oh man, I'm sure everybody's heard of them. The Montauk Project, the Philadelphia Experiment, like all of these sort of remote viewing, which I'm sure there is some truth to remote viewing and astral projection and all that kind of stuff. But when you get into ideas of using that to time travel, like physically, I don't think I think that's why most in the show Lost, this ends up creating, when it actually happens to the character Desmond, um, this ends up actually creating a time loop. The whole show Lost is about a time loop, and oh man, I could go way before I was aware of anything. Like I had never gotten into TV shows before, like ever. I was never into it, like a fan of like a Trekkie type fan of a show. But I really got into Lost. It spoke to me on some level, and this was before I knew any of what I knew now. But there is some really sinister shit going on in that show, and I might go into it at some point, but I won't do it now because I've already been going for a long time, and there's still got to get to the Mandela effect. But this it creates a time loop, and that's why newer, I think, science fiction really focuses on the theme of time loops, like the movie. You got to see the movie Predestination because they really focus on. I think if you watch that movie in terms of everything that I've discussed in this post so far, it'll really take on a different dimension. This post, this whatever this is, this talk, this me rambling about purely yeah. Let me note that this is all purely, obviously this is all purely hypothetical and speculative. So, but going back to the idea that the sun has that we were talking about right when I started, and sort of like the sun would have seasons in a cosmic scale, or at a cosmic scale, like we have, spring, summer, fall, and winter. The sun might have its own version of that seasonal scale, um, where it is necessarily transmitting more information to us if we are able to understand what is happening. Well, if we are able to be exposed to it, I guess, right? Because even me, I'm in sunny South Carolina, and we don't even see the sun all that much anymore. But so while probably some truth in the general concept of, oh no, I didn't mean to read that. So when you get into this sort of information, you'll inevitably run up against yuga cycles, right? But to me, I don't think that is correct, because that information is a way to make you believe that there is some sort of caste of awareness that your own awareness is confined to, depending on which cycle is present. Because right, there's the 4 yuga cycles, and the idea goes that like consciousness of humanity as a whole, it waxes and wanes based on the various cycle of cosmic cycle that we're in, and they would call this the Kali Yuga, right? And we're just supposed to believe that, oh yeah, this is the Kali Yuga, and there's all sorts of death and destruction in the Kali Yuga, but don't worry, we're about to enter into the next Yuga cycle, and it'll just take care of itself, right? It's that classic savior mentality, like, oh yeah, this energy is going to come, and it's going to take care of anything. But it's just like the Hindu religion in general, where there are these, where there's, the castes. Oh man, I'll save that for another time too. But just in short, the yuga cycles, or um, the Hindu religion is a oppressive caste system, and it's like their idea of reincarnation. They not now. Well, let me say this: they won't. If there's somebody on the street, struggling, or about to die, they'll be like, "Well, that was your karma, and I can't intervene because you need to pay your karmic debt." Right? It's totally ridiculous, and that's what this extrapolation into the yuga cycles is. It makes you believe that there is some sort of cast of awareness, that your own awareness is confined to depending on which cycle is present, and moreover makes you believe that you are dependent on some sort of external wave of cosmic energy coming to the planet to shift your awareness. And that's just not true. You can shift your awareness at any time. You don't, and there's people out there talking about, oh, there's wave X coming to the planet, oh, we're entering this belt of the cosmos, it's all going to change now. And it's like, no, nothing's going to change until you change yourself. That is just the truth. Um, and a lot of people say that truth, but if you don't have the correct instructions, which I believe Jonathan gave us, you're never going to accomplish what you are setting out to accomplish. It will be co-opted. That's the point of all of this controlled opposition.